Oh yeah, this isn't good. So we're about a little over half an hour into the test, and you can see here that, yeah, we're hitting that limit, 100 C on the package. We're getting thermal throttled there. I mean, it's still holding the clock speeds, which is fine, but yeah, we're it's definitely getting choked. And I mean, it doesn't matter how hard the AIO is going to be pushing itself. You can see here that if this is going to be choking it, doesn't matter how hard it's going, it just won't have the adequate airflow, so it just won't be able to work. So this is problematic.
Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. This is my Thermaltake View 51 case, and I really like it. I got it back in the summer of 2021, and it's been the case I've been using for my personal system since then. I really like the way it looks, I liked how easy it was to work inside as there's lots of room, cable management was very easy. I did do an overview of this case along with the AIO I'm using, so I'll link that video down below. Up until a few weeks ago, I really wasn't having any problems with this case, but if you've been following my channel for a while now, you'll know that I recently upgraded my personal rig with an i9 14900K. Before that, I was using a Ryzen 9 5900X. The 4900K paired with 8000 MHz RAM has been a pretty hefty upgrade over my 5900X in plenty of games. But there has been one major problem that I've been encountering, which is thermals. And I didn't actually realize the critical caveat of the Thermaltake View 51 until I migrated to the 14900K. As you all probably know, the 14900K can suck up quite a bit of power. Even with undervolting and enforcing stock limits, I was still running into thermal issues. Now you might be looking at this case and going, wow, how are you having thermal problems? Your case is loaded with fans. And you'd be sort of right. When I was using my 5900X, while I wasn't running into very high temps, it was still running fairly hot. While playing a game that would be multi-threaded like Cyberpunk 2077, I did notice the 5900X would be around 70C. On a side note, what people need to understand when comparing Intel temps to AMD is that even if the AMD CPU is using less power, they still get just as hot, if not run hotter in some instances, because of how dense the package is under the IHS, especially the X3D CPUs. Now when I switched over to my 4900K at stock, this is without any tuning, I'd be seeing around 60 to 70C, so similar temps to my 5900X during a gaming workload, which isn't terrible, but during an all-core workload like rendering or transcoding, the CPU would spike up into the 90s and basically be hitting the thermal limit at 100 degrees Celsius, where it would start to thermal throttle. As part of my upgrade, I also went with an Asus ROG Z790 Apex Encore for its overclocking capabilities when it comes to DDR5, but it did also have a plethora of tuning options for the CPU. I decided for now I'm just going to undervolt and power limit the CPU to retain stock performance, but at a lower power consumption and obviously to lower temps. Using some settings to undervolt via the load line calibration, I was able to get the CPU under control, where now during gaming we'd be seeing around 55 to 60C, but still during an all-core workload I still found it to eventually reach the thermal limit and it would start to throttle. The main reason for this is because the 360 AIO I'm using is mounted to the front, which is an ideal location for it typically, as then it should get the opportunity to draw in fresh cooler air. However, the issue with this case is that it has a glass front panel with an extrusion, so there is a bit of a gap on the side to draw in air. The top panel is also glass with a gap, so there is some room to exhaust hot air out of the case. While this worked out okay for my previous setup with the 5900X, the AIO just couldn't do its job to cool the 14900K, and along with that, because the case wasn't properly able to exhaust the hot air out, it was causing it to accumulate within and basically turned it into a hot box, affecting not just the CPU but my GPU and SSDs, the memory, and if you're into DDR5 tuning, you know how sensitive these things can be, especially with an overclock applied.
Oh yeah, this isn't good. So we're about a little over half an hour into the test, and you can see here that, yeah, we're hitting that limit, 100 C on the package. We're getting thermal throttled there. I mean, it's still holding the clock speeds, which is fine, but yeah, we're it's definitely getting choked. And I mean, it doesn't matter how hard the AIO is going to be pushing itself. You can see here that if this is going to be choking it. Doesn't matter how hard it's going, it just won't have the adequate airflow, so it just won't be able to work. So this is problematic.
So I decided it was time to forego the aesthetics of the case and get rid of the glass panels. Now the easiest solution to this would be to just simply take off the entire front and top panels themselves, and as much as I'm someone who doesn't necessarily care too much for aesthetics, this would have looked really ugly because then you'd see the exposed frame of the case and the wiring. Now I have seen some people online on places like Reddit who also have this case talk about how they removed the glass itself from the panels and substituted it with some mesh. And I thought, hey, that is exactly what I need. Because if we can add mesh to the front instead of glass, now that obstruction is basically gone, and the AIO can freely suck in air as much as it wants, and that hopefully should reduce temps. I looked on places like Home Depot and Rona, and unfortunately, I couldn't find something that, didn't look completely hideous. I still wanted something that at least could blend in well with the case. Upon searching, I found this white aluminum grille that you can use for a car bumper, but I really liked the look of it with the honeycomb design, and it being white, I thought this would integrate really well with my case. Along with that being soft and malleable meant I could easily cut it to shape and size that I wanted. We'll circle back to the mesh in a moment, but I wanted to quickly go over how I removed the glass in case anyone is wondering, or if you have the same or a similar case. I didn't make any sort of in-depth how-to clips, but this should still give you a good idea on what I did. The glass is attached to the plastic panels using an adhesive, and what I did was I took a heat gun and used it to warm up the spots where there was glue. The video I'm showing already has the glass taken off, but I'm just showing you guys for demonstration purposes. But after doing that for a couple minutes, I was able to pry the glass off quite easily. Bear in mind you'll want to wear some gloves when doing this, as the glass was very hot, and you'll also probably want to do this outside or in a garage. After that, it was time to work on the mesh. When I had received it in the mail, it came rolled up, but straightening it out was pretty easy. I was able to do most of it with just my hands, but to make it as flat and straight as possible, I laid it on the floor and used a rubber mallet to get rid of the unevenness. And as mentioned in the description of the product page, it was quite easy to work with and cut. You can use a regular pair of scissors, and what I did after I got the mesh panels to be flat, I had laid the glass pieces on top and just used a Sharpie to mark where I needed to cut. So I ended up getting the pieces of the mesh that were nearly identical in size and shape with the glass, and they were able to fit on perfectly with the top and front panels. I had also used some clear Gorilla mounting tape to stick the mesh on, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job so far, but we'll see how it's holding up in the long term. So here is what the Thermaltake View 51 looks like with the custom mesh mod. I gotta say, it actually doesn't look as bad as I thought it would have. The white aluminum honeycombed grille blends in nicely with the rest of the case's aesthetic, and that is exactly what I was looking for. There is definitely some fine tweaking I can do here, and the front grille is sagging towards the middle, so maybe I have to put like a rubber pad there or something. I don't know, I'll see what I have to do. I had also gotten this fine mesh cloth to act as a dust filter for the front grille. I decided to hold off on it because with a radiator in the front, I didn't want to obstruct any more airflow, but this is something I'll have to revisit down the road, say 6 or 8 months from now, and see how bad the dust accumulation gets. Alright, so the big question on your minds is, well, did this mesh mod help improve thermals? Well, I did some testing and we'll be going over the results. If you guys want to know the full system specs, you can check the video description down below. The first test I wanted to take a look at was IDA64, so this represents a pretty heavy all-core workload for the CPU and does also stress the RAM a bit, so that's why I didn't bother putting temps for other components like the GPU, as it wasn't doing anything. We can see here how the i9-14900K was averaging around 93 degrees Celsius for its package temp, but it did peak at 100 degrees Celsius, and the average would be higher than that, but 100 degrees Celsius is the stock thermal limit, so it probably would have averaged something higher if we had let it go. But what was happening here, and you can take a look at our temperature over time graph to get a better understanding, where I've plotted the P cores, they were spiking to 100 degrees Celsius. I didn't bother plotting the E cores because then it would have made this graph look really messy, and also because the behavior was also the same, so plotting the P cores will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. When this would happen, the CPU safeguards would come into play by reducing power and limiting clock speeds to bring the temps down, so essentially we were thermal throttling. There is further evidence of this because when we look at our P-core clock speeds, you can see how there were many times where the cores were dipping to around 5.4 to 5.5 gigahertz. Nothing drastic, but it would be ideal to avoid. You can also see our memory DIMMs became fairly warm. Nothing concerning. If they were around 55C, then I'd be very concerned. Now, how did our mesh or grill mod affect temperatures? Well, I'm very happy to report to you guys that the drops in temperatures was very significant. Oh man, I had absolutely no idea how badly the glass was choking this AIO, preventing it from doing its job and cooling the 14900K, because we're seeing some pretty drastic drops. During the same test, the 14900K was able to average around 75C for its package temp, and we only peaked at 83C. You can also see the temps of our memory DIMMs has dropped quite a bit to around 40C, so now we're nowhere near the concerning point, and now the inner overclocking enthusiast in me is tempted on pushing these sticks even further, but that's a topic for another video. You can also see from our temperature over time graph, the range in which the cores were hanging around in has been significantly reduced. Before, the P cores were within the low 70s to 100C, but on average around 90C, where now we see them bouncing between the mid 50s and to the low 80s, with an average in the mid 70s. So we are nowhere near that 100 degrees Celsius throttle limit. And you know what that results in? A perfectly smooth frequency. All of the P cores are there, guys. They were just happily locked to 5.7 gigahertz, so that's why it looks like you're just staring at one line for one core, but you can see that there's no fluctuation with the frequency or anything because the CPU wasn't being thermally throttled. So this is amazing. I'm super happy about this mod, which has resulted in significantly lowering our temps, and this is now also opening the door for me to perhaps further push the CPU if I want. The reason why I was so reluctant on doing it initially was because the thermals were just so bad. I was like, forget this, I'm just going to enforce stock for now. And to be fair, I'm finding stock performance is adequate. Like, it does 5.7 gigahertz all core out of the box, and that is ample. But if I want to delve into some further CPU overclocking, now I'll be comfortable because I've got the thermal headroom to do so. Also, in case any of you were wondering, by running the CPU cooler, you do also get lower power consumption, which makes sense. As the silicon heats up and operates at a higher temperature, the power will go up. It's nothing drastic, but it's nice to see nonetheless. The next test I wanted to show you guys was a game, and for this test I used Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Now, even though this is nearly a 6-year-old game, I still decided to use it because it does hit both the CPU and GPU pretty hard. It scales well with multiple cores and threads, but it's also why I have included more components on this graph, because the other issue when it comes to a gaming workload is that now the GPU comes into the mix. And since we're running the RTX 3090, there is going to be a decent amount of heat, and that means the case needs to be able to exhaust all the heat in an effective manner. As you guys can see, when we ran the test with the Thermaltake View 51 stock glass panels, the temps aren't horrible. The 14900K averages around 58C and peaked at 71, which wouldn't cause any thermal throttling or anything, so it's not detrimental. But we can see our memory sticks are also running around 50C, which is too high for my liking, especially for a gaming workload. And I've got two SSDs here, and again, these temps aren't really problematic for the drives. If we were running at around 70C, then I'd be pretty concerned. Along with that, our RTX 3090 averages around 77 degrees Celsius in the core, and we see our memory is at 81 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, I did swap out the thermal pads on the card. The stock ones were just absolute garbage, and the memory would run up to around 100 degrees Celsius. So these temperatures upon a first glance are not terrible. I'll be honest, if I was using this system primarily for gaming, then I wouldn't have been even prompted to do the mesh mod in the first place, because like I said, these temps during gaming aren't at a level where they're a detriment to the performance or capabilities of the components. However, since we've done the mesh mod, how did these temps improve during this gaming workload? Well, once again, across the board, we see some pretty decent results. I'm quite happy to see how once again the CPU dropped by a pretty drastic margin. 45C on the average, and it peaked at 54, so a 13-degree drop, so that is indeed impeccable. Our memory DIMMs are also just chilling at around 39C, so that's like another 10-degree drop. Our drives have also dropped by a decent margin, but we weren't at a terrible thermal point to begin with. Along with that, our temps on the 3090 also improved, but it's nothing drastic, but welcome nonetheless. This 3090 of mine has some pretty crap silicon, one of the worst GPUs I've ever dealt with when it comes to overclocking and undervolting, so I've just left it at stock. It doesn't have any headroom. If I was to put my test system's 4090 in here, it would actually improve the overall temps of the system, because that thing undervolts like a champ and would reduce overall system power consumption by nearly 100 watts. So I'm not gonna lie, I've been kind of tempted, but I just don't really have a need for it in terms of my desktop gaming requirements. All in all, I am very happy I went through with this mod, but what I'm not happy about was that this case wasn't that cheap to begin with, and Thermaltake, I hope someone from your company is watching, they really should have done some thorough testing in regards to thermals to begin with. Now, the most easiest thing for me to have done would have been to just mount the radiator on the side intake as there's no glass, but that still would have only partially solved my problem because the top glass was clearly obstructing the case from exhausting heat. Like, I get it, glass looks cool and all, but if it can negatively impact your temps this drastically, then forget it. I'm okay with a large glass side panel window, but if you're putting glass on any panel that has fans for intake and exhaust, then I'm not going to be recommending that case. Lesson learned. So if you're in a situation where you're experiencing poor thermals and you've got a case with glass panels where the intake and exhaust fans go, then either remove it and mod the case with some mesh, or I would recommend just changing to another case altogether. Alrighty guys, so that's going to do it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.